So I can understand why Max would be angry at that, especially when the person that he's been angry at basically goes, "Nah, it wasn't my fault. I was just being aggressive." No, mate, you were being clumsy. There's a difference. Kamui Kobayashi brought in on the back of a Toyota driver training program. Yuki Tsunoda is just the same. He's come in through Honda. These drivers would not get any recognition in Europe if it weren't for the fact that they're backed by a Japanese engine manufacturer. So to use that as a reason why you're not going to put him in the seat, you know what that means.
I've always done this.
Driver of the year, Baxty. Go on then.
Yes. Charles Leclerc.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown podcast. With me as always, my brethren, my comrades, my right honourable colleagues, the one that they call Shazinho and the one that they call Sir Baxty. How are we doing, chaps? It doesn't matter how you are doing because there are very many F1 centric threads at which we need to pull. Talk to me, Sir Baxty, about Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Good race or bad race?
It was a great start, and then it settled. And then the excitement came at the end when Lewis was charging his way through the field on fresher tyres. Brilliant win by Lando. He did not put a foot wrong in that Grand Prix. Look, absorbed the pressure of being the lone driver for the Constructors' Championship, won it for them. Obviously wasn't his fault that Oscar got taken out at turn one by Max. But he handled that pressure really well, which I think in previous races he may not have done.
Wow.
He had a little bit too much pace for the Ferraris. Awesome performance and a richly deserved Constructors' Championship for McLaren.
Go on then, Shez. I don't disagree with anything that Basti said there, but do you, like me, feel... I feel like the story of 2024 as far as the Drivers' Championship is one of what could have been. All the drivers on the grid are currently saying that, listen, somebody should have been able in that machine to push Max Verstappen through to season end and keep him honest. To that, sir, you say what?
I say I agree. I think that if you look at the pace of the cars across the entirety of the season, once Red Bull sort of dropped off their perch after Miami, really, McLaren were the most consistently fast car, the most consistently fastest car across the remainder of the season, and yet, across the two drivers, they got what, 6 wins? Did they in the end? 5 wins? It was
6.
hard. Yeah, it was 6 wins, wasn't it? Because Lando got 4 and Oscar got 2 in the end, which is not. That's less than the number of wins Max got on his own. You'd expect with the car advantage they had across the latter half of the season, they should have done more with it. Some of that was maybe because Max really, really maximized, no pun intended, what he did with his car. Part of the reason was because there were other drivers that got in the mix. So the Mercedes drivers had a little Indian summer in there as well for 2 races. The Ferraris were in there too, but the main problem was that when the opportunities were there to win races, McLaren and especially Lando Norris found ways to not do it. And I think against a competitor like Max, especially with the head start that he got at the beginning of the season, you just can't do that. Just can't.
Agreed. Agreed, bro. I tell you what my issue with Lando and Zach Brown is. I keep feeling like they talk too much. Do you know what I mean? I know they won the Constructors, and that's worthy of note, especially after 26 years without silverware. That you props, standing ovation, round of applause. But in a season where I feel like they could have done so much more, they could have done the double if they'd had their Weetabix. I just feel like, I don't know, chaps. Every time I hear Lando, Lando is brilliant. Look, let me give some props to Lando first before I go on to blaspheme him shortly thereafter. Lando was brilliant. Sandvort's a brilliant case in point. 20 to 30 seconds beating Max Verstappen, notwithstanding the deficit in machinery. props. You gotta clap your hands right. But then afterwards, he comes over the radio and he starts leveraging Max's phrase "simply lovely." I'm like, hang on, chap, win yourself a few more races first before you start bantering Max Verstappen, 4-time champion, and then Zach Brown. Once they've won the constructors, says, "Oh, Lando, simply awesome." No, he goes, "Lando, you're awesome, simply lovely." That I'm like, oh, I don't know. Baxter, are they talking too much? Do they need to walk before they talk that way?
Yeah, I mean, Lando's got the same amount of wins that Max has got championships. So, I mean,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, it's a bit. No, look, I mean, I enjoy. Yeah, they're trying to get an edge on Max when Max is pretty rock. There's not many drivers that can get under Max's skin. I don't think Lando's one of them. I think one of them is headed off to Ferrari, and another one's a tall, lanky Englishman from Kings Lynn. But it's I don't mind it. It's a bit of gamesmanship, but I think if it starts having an effect on Red Bull's results, which it isn't, I'd be very surprised. But yeah, what can you do about it? It's just a bit of fun, particularly when they've just won the championship. You can give them a little bit of
I think I should
room to be happy.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't mind them celebrating. Like, punch the air, do you know what I mean? Like, pop a champers. Like, yeah, go hard. But to leverage, I don't know. I just think because of the seat, if they'd optimised Shez and Baxter, if they hadn't made so many mistakes, Hungary, bloody the double stack in Silverstone, I'd be like, no, go for it, chaps. If you want to banter Max Verstappen and Lewis and Charles and whoever else, copy. But because they've made so many mistakes, I just don't feel like they're in position to be talking so much. Not just yet. I feel like they need to go and do more, be better more of the time, especially flipping Nora. Lando starts. Listen, Lando's an enigma, a brilliant peddler, absolutely. But how he can make that same mistake so many times. Poor defensive posture off the line, poor switching through the gears, like gear 1, gear 2, poor launch RPM dialed it. Like, he just does this same, I don't know, it's like he doesn't it's like he arrives on the grid and he's not awake yet. He hasn't thawed out, he hasn't yet had his Weetabix. But anyway, I digress. Speaking of getting under the skin of Maximilian Verstappen, Baxter, talk to me about George Russell, who, for the unacquainted, went very, very hard over the course of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekend, saying of Max Verstappen that it's been too long now. Somebody needs to stand up to him. He's been a bully in F1 and I'm not having it anymore. Baxter, to that, sir, you respond how?
Sorry, I'm just going to pop up and get some popcorn for this. Yeah. This was great. It was just, we need a bit of needle. It's been a bit sterile for a while, just kind of tame, nobody really taking lumps out of each other. I mean, that's what happens when you have somebody absolutely dominating like Red Bull and Max have done. And yeah, McLaren weren't quite willing to make it a really hard fought thing. Yeah, they would kind of take a little jab and then sort of retreat into the corner a little bit, whereas George just went, no, I'm gonna have at it. I don't care. Um, we've seen George get to Max once before. That was in Baku when they had the collision. Max was very, very irrationally angry. Like, I mean, I say irrationally, kind of loosely, but it was just he was very angry about it, and I thought that's a bit of an overreaction to. I mean, okay, you're probably annoyed that George is trying to defend it, but I mean, you would do the exact same in that situation. Like 99 times out of 100, Max will never take responsibility for a crash. Um,
Apart from
so
Abu Dhabi, where he did.
apart from Abu Dhabi, that's why I said 99 times out of 100, because normally it's 100 out of 100, but he's now had one exception to prove the rule. Um, you know, I, I enjoyed it, but I want to see it on track. And I
That's
think
correct.
George has shown that he's not afraid to keep his foot in, and he's not going to kowtow to Max when they're in wheel to wheel combat. Spain was a great example of that, and when he was the chaser in the sprint race in Brazil in 22 as well, he was happy to get his elbows out when he needed to. So yeah, I think if we can see it play out on track, I'm happy. But I'm enjoying the preliminary skirmishes as they come in.
Chosinho, let me ask you the question this way then. Expanded upon the point that Baxley's just made, does King George Russell of Kingsley and Norfolk have the minerals requisite even to challenge one Maximilian Verstappen over the course of a 24 race championship? Yes or no, sir?
Maybe.
Oh.
Yeah. He's definitely got the 1 lap pace to get in there and do it, right? But his race performances haven't really shown the level of consistency that you'd expect from someone that's going to go up against Max. And that's the problem really with all of the drivers that are going up against Max in this championship. That they even George, because he can't conjure up the race pace that even his teammate can, even now after 3 seasons against him, would probably need a little bit of a car advantage to be able to overcome Max across a season. And that's why, look, I enjoy a bit of hyperbole and a bit of tete-a-tete as much as everybody else, but the criticism that George Russell laid at Max Verstappen's door across the Abu Dhabi weekend rang a little bit hollow for me, because in all of their skirmishes, as you put it so far, the stakes have all been on George. Like, Max hasn't really needed to do anything. Like in Baku, if George passes Max, it's fine. It doesn't really make a difference. And the way I saw that incident was Max was kind of happy to let George go past because he didn't want to fight it and lose position. And George like misjudged it and went into the side of Max. So I can understand why Max would be angry at that, especially when the person that he's been angry at basically goes, "Nah, it wasn't my fault. I was just being aggressive." No, mate, you were being clumsy. There's a difference. And it was the same. It was the same again in Las Vegas last year, where they had another little clash, and again, George didn't see Max coming. Why is it always that he doesn't see Max coming? Again, it was a clumsy skirmish. So again, if you're going to get angry at that, and then the person's going to be like, "Nah, it wasn't my fault," yes, you're going to be a bit annoyed. And the way that I read Abu Dhabi was, yeah, he's Max may have said all of this stuff to George, whether in the steward's room, which I now highly doubt, or outside of it, which sounds more likely. But the end result of it was Max said some words to him off track, which led to a tangible outcome on track, which was that Max went from second on the grid to first after the first corner, with George dropping from pole to third. So what does that tell you? That actually the power in that relationship is not with the guy that's making a big deal out of it in the Abu Dhabi presser. It's with the guy who's just won his 4th world championship and looks highly likely to do it again next year.
Oof. It's going to get a bit techie, Shez. And Shez, you know what? I concur with you, mate. Like, it's similar to my opinions on Lando. I like Baxter. I love that George is rising from the embers like a phoenix and trying desperately to face down Maximilian Verstappen. I enjoy that, and I think that's worthy of commendation, except for the fact that I don't think he's got it. He doesn't have it in his locker to challenge Max Verstappen on track. George Russell can't do Brazil. He wouldn't do that. That's not in his automotive vocabulary. Just doesn't have. Do you know what I mean? I want to see George walk the walk as much as talk the talk. It would be brilliant. What he said there, if he goes and wins the championship next year, we'll all look back on that with fondness. If he goes and like SH1Ts the bed next year, if indeed he has a car capable of challenging for races and championships, then he's going to look like an absolute fool. Like, what are you talking about, George? You look worse than Lando does for all his simply lovely banters. Speaking of Lando, what do we make of these power rankings? Because I had to eat some humble pie recently on the Cameron CC channel, because I've been positing the following thesis: that British bias is a nonsense, that it's a misnomer, a synonym of groupthink even, that British bias is just like fugazi, a myth, a legend even, And then I come to find out that in the power rankings, two things about the power rankings. The overall power ranking for 2024, who guys do you think they had top of the 20 drivers on the grid? Lando no wins. 8.2 was the ranking that they gave him. In second place was the champion, the 4-time back-to-back champion, Max Verstappen, on 8.1. I thought, you know what, there must be something going on here that I'm missing. Let me go and have a look. Let me benchmark against something that I can be concrete with, that I know for sure. So I went back and had a look at, so Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the power ranking for Lando Norris was a perfect 10. Copy. That broadly, directionally correct. That makes sense. Let me have a look, see what Max Verstappen got for Brazil as a drive. One of the greatest, most generational drives that I've probably ever seen in my 300 gazillion years that I've been watching F1. They gave Max Verstappen a 9.8. Baxty, talk to me about this, sir, because there is something that I'm clearly... I must be missing something as to why Max Verstappen could get 9.8 for Brazil and Lando Norris can get a perfect 10.0. What am I missing, Sir Baxty?
I've got a question for you. Who is this, fan voted or is it? It's not fan voted.
No.
Okay.
So it was apparently F1.com says something to the effect there are 5 experts on a panel. I tried desperately, chap, to find their names. I wanted to do my due diligence properly, but unfortunately, I too was unable to use Google.
I mean, it shows how much I pay attention to the power rankings, to be honest. The way I see it is that there was a lot more that happened in the Brazil weekend for Max to get docked points. There was the sprint race where, he was actually pretty good in the sprint race, but he didn't win it because the McLaren was definitely the better car in that race. Though I think you could argue that if some ill-timed yellow flags hadn't have happened, Max might have chased them down. I suspect he got docked 0.2 for a qualifying thing that wasn't really his fault.
I mean, what are we doing here, bro? That's outrageous. How?
I mean, if they're being consistent, then they're being more consistent than F1 stewards, right? Yeah. Look, power rankings are all fun, but they don't, it's all well and good. It's a talking point for people to have, but they don't score you points on Sundays and Saturdays. It's, Max, I think Max is going to be quite okay finishing second in the power rankings because he's got a nice big shiny trophy in his cabinet once again. So, he's not worried about it.
Shez, talk to me about this British bias, sir. Again, we can't crystallise the accusation of British bias without knowing the nationality of the stewards, right? Just help me make sense of these rankings. How 9.8 for Max in Brazil, perfect 10 for Lando in Abu Dhabi. Overall season ranking, power ranking, Lando gets first with 8.2 and Max gets first with 8.1. I presumed it might be something to do with the car, but in the way that in their judging criteria, very specifically, they talk about normalising for car performance. So how do we get here, Shez? What's going on?
Okay, so to that first point, I think that's probably why Lando's up there, because they're trying to say that the Red Bull was a better car, which on my favorite parameter it is. But let's take that out of the equation for a second. I think the power rankings demonstrate perfectly why using an average score for individual. Averaging out the scores that you've given for individual races is inherently flawed. If you look at the race and autosport, they also do a race by race driver score or ranking, and then at the end of the season they'll do a average of all of those. But they will say, look, this is not the way that we actually decide who we think was the best driver across the season. They do that separately based on their writers looking back at the entire season and then deciding who they think was the best driver. And on that front, it's always going to be Max. But what this does is that tiny little mistakes across one race might have dropped a particular driver's score ever so slightly. So like we said, Max not Max overtaking behind the VSC in the sprint race might have dropped his score ever so slightly in Brazil, and that then drops his average across the entire season, which is not fair. But that's why the power ranking average at the end of the season is a nonsense stat to look at. It's much more informative to look at what a particular set of writers have looked at, have ranked somebody when they looked at the entirety of the season, not an average of individual scores. Does that make sense?
I will see that, and I'll raise you this, Shez. That Brazilian drive was so good that it has to more than offset that mistake in inverted commas that he made when trying to overtake Oscar Piastri or whatever. It has to be a perfect. To anybody that knows anything about wheel, that performance over the course of a weekend, so good was it in the actual Grand Prix when everyone, all the other 19 was struggling to keep it on the black stuff. That dude just goes from 17th to first in 43 laps on a 69 lap race, and then proceeds to set purple laps every single lap there on it. That needs to be a perfect 10. Anybody that scores that anything less than perfect 10
I'm not going to
needs their F1 card.
Yeah, it's a perfect 10. I mean,
yeah, Cameron,
there's no doubt in it.
I'm not going to argue with you about that. You're right. It should be a perfect 10. But again, this is not based on power rankings, but I know what Autosport do, because they're very transparent in the way that they tell you how they rank their drivers after each race. And they say that a major error will drop you a point in their scores. And it depends how you then, because if you're going to say that Max lost the sprint race in Brazil because he overtook under the VSC, well, then that was his fault and it counts as a major error. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it at all. Right? He should have got a perfect 10 for that weekend. But if that's the criteria you are using and you are hemmed in by that criteria, then you have to use it. And maybe the power rankings are the same as well. But that's why you shouldn't use the power rankings as gospel. These don't mean anything.
This feels like, you know what this reminds me of, Shez? This reminds me of when Checo and Lando Norris both made full starts earlier on in the year, but because the transponders weren't working, it was like, well, we can't there can't be any like eye test, surely. That was like one of the greatest drives that I've ever seen in my life. And so too, so many F1 aficionados concur.
Yeah, don't disagree. You're 100% right.
So then they need to sort it. I know judging has to be fundamentally subjective. There is always a subjective portion, like mixed martial arts is testament and boxing to that, but bloody Nora, 9.8.
But that is why whoever these 5 judges are should sit down and divorce themselves from the power rankings that they've got an average for, and then just rank the drivers based on how they think they performed across the entire season, not an average of individual races, because that is inherently flawed, I think.
I think also they probably judge Max a bit harsher than Lando, because Max has got a much higher level of previous performance. So like, they expect more from him than they have done from Lando, because Lando's not been in this position before where he's winning races.
No, but that's it. If you're going to be objective about it, it shouldn't have anything to do.
No,
with
it shouldn't. But
experience.
it's probably playing in the back of their mind there, I suspect.
But then that's a flawed system of ranking. Then
the power rankings are flawed to begin with.
Here's also, but here's where I sit with this. I feel like a numpty talking about this. British bias is a myth. All of my Dutch subscribers are looking at me like, hang on. What are you saying, Cameron? Have a look at these power rankings and then regurgitate that. Try regurgitating that nonsense again. I've got to take 2 seats for now, because I can't explain those power rankings if not leveraging for a bit of cheeky bias of some sorts. But whatever. Good luck, F1. Let's talk about Checo Perez and Red Bull Racing driver silly season. It's a bit techie. Who's going to replace him, Sir Baxley?
I suspect it's going to be Liam Lawson, isn't it? I prefer it to be Yuki Tsunoda because I think he's earned the shot. But
so why won't it be Yuki then?
I think they feel that Liam's got a better temperament than Yuki, which I don't agree with at all. I think Yuki did. they still see Yuki as the 2021 driver who swears a lot, and it's like, well, he's clearly not that. But I mean, obviously, this is all outside looking in. We don't know, the data that they've got and everything else. He beat Liam 6-0 in qualifying. Yes, okay, look, there's some context there. For example, Liam set a faster time in Austin but had a penalty, so he didn't then set another one. And he was close to Yuki in a couple of qualifying sessions, but the clock never lies. Yuki was faster 6 times out of six. Well, 5-1 if you want to count for Austin. And then in the races, I think Yuki did a better job than Liam, Austin aside, again. Um, and I think he's beaten the last three teammates, so he should be given the shot. The Red Bull Junior system will be made to be even more of a joke than it currently is if they don't promote the guy that's been doing the job and has earned the right to get the drive. The last person, I mean, Max was promoted mid-season, but the last person when they needed to replace somebody at the end of a season and they could look at the two drivers after some time was Daniel Ricciardo, because they was just like, yeah, let's call him up. They should have called up Jean-Eric Verne in 2014. They didn't. They called up Kvyat. They should have called up. No, they called up Gasly. Well, actually, no, Gasly was the last one, wasn't he? Gasly, because he had done a better job than Hartley. But then they brought up Albon after no races at all, and then they had to go and get Checo because their system was broken. And even still, I think the system is broken because Liam's only had a handful of races, and you're starting to repeat the mistakes that you did in 2019. So,
Oof.
yeah,
Oof.
it's a vicious cycle. Basically, it's unless you're Max Verstappen, we don't care.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. Yeah. With good reason as well sometimes. Let me tell you this, Shez, before you respond. Yuki Tsunoda average points per race weekend whilst he was driving with Danny Rick, 1.22. Yuki Tsunoda average points per race weekend whilst driving alongside Liam Lawson, 1.33. Danny Rick's average points per race weekend, 0.67. Liam Lawson's points per race weekend, 0.67. Tell me, Shez, how Yuki Tsunoda won't get that seat, sir.
You've hit a nerve, man. I'm still pretty annoyed about this whole thing, and we haven't even had an announcement yet. I think if we're going to look at this systematically, the first question we've got to answer is, does Sergio Perez deserve to be kicked out of that seat? I think the overriding right answer to that question is yes, he does. But there are some caveats to that answer. The second is, if you're going to pick the driver who has on performance deserved that seat, then as you say, on both qualifying and race against any driver that he has been put up against in that seat since Pierre Gasly vacated the opposite one. He's beaten Nick de Vries, basically ended his Formula One career. He's beaten Daniel Ricciardo, Liam Lawson twice. I mean, based on pure performance, there is nobody else that should be getting that seat. But there are a couple of things. The Honda thing really gets on my nerves because that seems to be used as a reason why he won't get a seat, because Yuki Tsunoda is not really a Red Bull junior. He's actually a Honda junior. The reason that really annoys me is that there hasn't really been a top-line Formula One driver from Japan that has not had some support from an engine manufacturer. Taku Sato, also sponsored by Honda. Kamui Kobayashi brought in on the back of a Toyota driver training program. Yuki Tsunoda is just the same. He's come in through Honda. These drivers would not get any recognition in Europe if it weren't for the fact that they're backed by a Japanese engine manufacturer. So to use that as a reason why you're not going to put him in the seat, you know what that means. And I'm not going to say it, but that's the reason, right? Because it's not about performance. It's not about performance. It's about where he comes from. And that is a major, major problem for me. The second thing is, and I've said this to you, Baxi, I think the way that Red Bull are deciding or evaluating who goes in that seat is not based on a projected performance at all. Because if it was, they wouldn't be just picking hats out of the tombola and then and then just putting them in that seat. They're doing it based on vibe more than they are actual performance, and it's not specifically performance in the car. It's how they would stack up against Max. And I think Yuki is the only one that has understood the game because he got in that car in Abu Dhabi for the post-season test and came out at the end of it and said, I think this car suits my style. Right? That's been the issue for all of these drivers. They cannot cope with the front end on that car, with the amount of rear instability it then induces. That's been the problem for all of them. Now Yuki understands that, and he said, "No, I'm all right. I can handle that." So if you want someone that can handle a really, really positive front end and a loose rear, I'm your guy. Don't get Liam Lawson. I've beaten him already, mate. Like he's not going to be the guy that's going to be able to withstand that rear instability. You're just going to be replacing him in the middle of the season.
But then this is the thing, Shez, because if you're just looking at the qualifying, this whole thing through the qualifying pace lens, then what you say makes sense. But per the article that you sent to me, if you look at Liam Lawson's race pace, then it's a different conversation. If Yuki Tsunoda, I guarantee you this, if Yuki Tsunoda were dominating Liam Lawson in both quali and race pace, we'd be having ourselves a different conversation because you would have put this out of reach now, Yuki.
Okay. Can we talk about that? Because Alpha Tauri, VCarb have had the weirdest strategy calls on the entire grid for the whole season. They're sticking their drivers on a one-stop plan, on a one-stop strategy with the soft tires. Like, how is anybody supposed to demonstrate their race pace based on the strategy that is coming off that pit wall? Nobody. So that's why for VCarb, the qualifying deficit is actually the most important parameter. Right? You don't like if you look at the race pace, it's completely a nonsense. And when you look at why Sergio Perez has performed as badly as he has against Max Verstappen, and the same thing for Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly before him, it's because they cannot match Max in qualifying. This is what Helmut Marko had said. We need a driver that can be within 3/10 of Max Verstappen. And I think 3/10 is massively generous because 3/10 on the grid right now, if Max starts fifth on the grid, you're out in Q2.
No, sound points, Strap. Sound points. I don't hate it, Shez. I really want to argue, but I think you've nailed it.
Anger on this point.
No, you've nailed it. You've nailed it more succinctly than I ever could. Go on then, chaps. As we round third base, I want you to give me quick fire answers. First question, I'll put it to you first, Shez, since you love a one-worder. Driver of the year 2024 is
Max Verstappen.
Same question to you, Baxley.
Okay, I have to qualify mine. If you're not familiar with how I do it, excuse me. If you're not familiar with how I do it, I never pick the world champion because they've got the trophy at the end of the year. I like to highlight somebody else.
What's going on?
I've always done this.
Driver of the year, Baxley. Go on then.
Yes. Charles Leclerc. And I'm not saying that to wind you up. I genuinely mean, because I was initially going to pick George, and it was really close between him and Charles. And then that drive in Abu Dhabi from Charles, which was epic, and we haven't given enough praise, just tipped him over the edge for me.
Actually, why was he at the back of the grid?
Well, you made a mistake. And he had an engine penalty, which wasn't his fault.
Yeah, sure, but he got track limits, didn't he?
He did.
Sainz didn't.
Look at this, Shez.
What is this Damoclesian conversion for?
No, Shez is talking. What we're not going to do ever on here is drink from the fountain of unreason. I think you make sound points. I think you make.
Charles Leclerc's my driver of the year. There's my caveat that I never pick the world champion.
This is deliberately contrarian for no reason. Baxley, they will come for you, sir. Do you know what I mean?
Don't care. I have my rule. It's a rule I've had for years.
That's chaos. Go on then, Shez. Tell me your race of the year.
Right. Just because I'm going to stay consistent as well. I voted for this on somebody else's website, but it's got to be for me Silverstone. It just had everything. The main reason for that race being that I thought you saw the two best drivers on the grid, not this season, but the two best drivers overall, having a ding dong when everybody else made mistakes and fell away. And that for me was pure sporting Formula One. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant to watch. Um, and on a personal level, it was an emotional outcome. So yeah, Silverstone.
Baxty.
Silverstone, but with a shout out for Monza as well.
So hang on there, Baxty. How comes you can't pick the driver of the year, yeah, but you give special dispensation to the race of the year, Baxty? How are we being
How am I giving special dispensation?
No, so you pick the race of the year. What happened to picking the non-race of the year as you did with the driver of the year?
It's a completely different metric. Like races don't win. Like you are the world champion race of the year. Like
Fair play. I just call you out for a smidgen of inconsistency. What do I think? What's my race of the year? I enjoyed Baku, you know. I remember thinking Baku was just levels, like just for the stakes and the uncertainty and Oscar and I don't know. Now after the fact that we find out about Mini DRS, that takes the shine off of it. Silverstone was nuts, but I feel like I'm doing a backsteer and picking the second best, right? Trying to look for a narrative more interesting. I thought Baku was levels and Brazil. I mean, come on, like.
Driver of the season, definitely. Not the best race.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, I'll take that. Right, lads, you've been legends. Thank you so much for the time. That's been Sir Baxty. That's been Shazinho. Go and check both of those guys out at BaxtyBF1 on the YouTubes and at Tired GP also on the YouTubes. Like, comment, subscribe, all that gubbins. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to like and comment and share and subscribe. If you are listening to this on a podcasting platform, be sure to drop 5 stars and a follow. As always, between now and next time, remember to look but never stare.